Today, our guest is from the UK, from Loughborough. His name is Phil Weaver. He is inspirational, motivational, and a visionary. He's a big man with a big heart. And it gives me a great pleasure to invite Phil to come and share his story. Thank you, Phil.
Phil, thank you so much for coming to speak to us here at Life Stories Worldwide.
You're very welcome.
Alan said you're a big man with a big heart, but tell us a little bit about yourself and where you come from to start with, please.
I am from the Midlands, Stoke-on-Trent, North Staffordshire. It's famous for the potteries and the pottery industry, Spode and Wedgwood, and all the big companies that produce china. And I became a Christian when I was about 14, something like that. And interestingly enough, the week I became a Christian, and none of my family are Christian, I was the first person to give my life to the Lord in my family. But within a week, I knew God had spoken to me about serving him full time at some stage. And that was within a week.
Excellent.
So from there, I'm married now to Helen, who's from Scotland, and I have 2 sons who I'll tell you about later.
How long have you been married to Helen?
I've been married to Helen for 46 years.
Wow.
Yeah.
Excellent. Now then, of course, you said you grew in the Midlands, up in the Midlands. What was it like as a young boy? I nearly said when you grew up during the war, but you're not that old.
Watch it.
But what was it like as a young boy growing up in the Midlands? I mean, did you have ambitions like, say, I mean, did your dad want to go to the potteries or the mines or whatever, you know, or have a trade or something like that? What was it like growing up?
Everyone in Stoke-on-Trent has some type of relationship with the potteries, with the pot banks. And I thought I might end up in a pot bank like everybody else. Always wanted to be a footballer. There was only one thing that stopped me, and that was talent. And I just wasn't good enough. And I come from a council house estate, one of the rougher ones in Stoke-on-Trent called Abbey Hulton. And I was just a typical council house boy, full of mischief, below average by any standard, very much below average. Left school, could hardly read or write. And it's fascinating, and had a bad stammer when I was growing up as well.
Wow.
And I had to go to speech therapy, and week in and week out, and I struggled speaking. It caused me to struggle with confidence, and I was always the lad who didn't really fit in but was desperate to fit in. And it's interesting, I think, George, because I would be the last person who you would expect to be a public speaker and an author, and not being able to read or write, well, not very well. I remember one of my reports at school, the maths teacher said, last year, Philip hit rock bottom. This year, he started drilling. So that sort of tells you where I was. And I left school, no qualifications, and with this stutter. But it does amaze me. Only God can do this. When God gets hold of a person's life, he can change you for good. So now I speak. I'm a public speaker. The stammer has gone. And I have I'm the author of 16 books. So It's amazing what God can do, really, if you only give him a chance.
Now, you said when you were a kid, you had a great recommendation from your teacher by the sound of it, and you had a stammer. How did that affect you as a person, and did it hinder you in any way in growing up?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I didn't have much confidence, so I was full of bravado. I wanted to be accepted. I think most people want to be accepted, especially young people. And I was full of bravado, full of mischief. And I do wonder where I might have been if I hadn't have gone the route I'd gone. Many of my friends ended up in prison and in all types of trouble. But that was the type of estate we came from. My father ran what we call working men's clubs, social clubs. And so I was brought up around the club world, and as did my family. I'm the middle sibling of 5, and we were all brought up in the clubs.
And how did you get on with the family, like your dad and your mum? How was that relationship for you?
Yeah, I think they would say we were close, but we weren't at all, really. I can't remember having one meaningful conversation with my father, actually. And they were hard workers, and they did incredibly well to keep a roof over our heads and to feed us. And Dad had a break, years ago. Everybody used to do what they call the pools, the football coupons.
Yeah.
And Dad had a break, and one day he won on the pools. In those days, it was about £3,700, which was a lot of money. But then the interesting thing is, George, 12 months to the day later, he won £3,700 again.
Oh, wow.
And that's how we moved out of the council house, and Mum and Dad bought their own house.
Wow. So your dad, you say, I mean, obviously in those days they didn't do psychology and then chat to the kids and bring them up like that. You basically dragged up and left to your own devices. So when you were growing up in school, did you have any ambitions apart from being a footballer? Did you have anything else you wanted to be or anything? Any dreams?
No, I didn't really. I'm as a typical council house boy. Apart from wanting to do sport, I didn't have many dreams at all. It was only when God got hold of me that everything started to change.
Right.
And I just thought I'd be brought up on the estate. I remember one of my teachers saying to me, if you got a job in a factory weaver, you'll be doing good, but you'll most probably get the sack. And in truth, I proved him wrong. I did get a job in the factory. He proved me wrong, George. I did get the sack, but that's another story.
Tell us about the story then, about how you got the sack then.
Well, there was no work in me in those days. No work at all. And if I was the boss, I would have sacked me too. But I had the sack from a number of jobs, actually. And it was just the nature of the way I was. God got hold of me, though. And I'd had a number of jobs. And believe it or not, I went to Bible college when I was 17.
Right.
And that was a real faith venture. And hardly able to read. My stammer was getting better, but I still had a stammer. And I was the youngest person ever to be accepted into Bible college. And it was a real training ground. In the end, it's where I met my wife. We met and we married within 7 months. And people say, oh, did you have to get married? Yes, not because she was pregnant, but because I loved her. And she loved me. So we got married 7 months later. And I served 3 years at Bible college. And then the last thing I expected was to go into the ministry, dog collar and all that. And when I was seeking God, God spoke to me very clearly. I was only 20 when I applied. And God said, I want you to apply for the ministry. And I applied to Elam. I went to an Elam church in those days, an Elam Pentecostal church. And I applied and went for interview, and unbelievably young and naive. Didn't know anything at all. And in fact, years and years later, one of the men who interviewed me, there was about 11 men who interviewed me. And he said, Phil, you got in by the skin of your teeth. And I got in simply because, not of me, because God wanted me in. And I've been in the ministry ever since.
Excellent. Now, you said you were the first person in your household to be a Christian. So tell us a little bit how you came to find out about Jesus in the first place.
Yeah, well, up the road from where we lived in the council estate, there was an Anglican church, an evangelical Anglican church. And I started to go to the youth club. It's very common in those days for the church to have the youth club, table tennis and badminton and football. And there was a minister there by the name of Roy Phillips. He was a young man in his early 30s. And my father worked most of the night. And I didn't have much of a relationship with him. He was a great father, but we didn't talk. We never saw one another, very rarely. And Mr. Phillips, he had a lot of time for me, and he and all the other young people. and he was interested in me. I liked him. He was an old-fashioned guy to come to that type of estate, and he'd never put him there, but he was there. He had a wife and 3 children, and I started to go along. He would take me along if he preached somewhere other than his own church. He'd take me along and he'd say, would you like to come? And I'd go, and he'd ask me how I'd done at school. And then one day I was playing football in the street at the other end of the estate. In those days, children, even 8 and 9, they'd stay out till 8 and 9, 10 at night.
Don't tell me jumpers for goalposts.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. And I was playing football in the streets, and my friend said to me, just with one other guy, and my friend said to me, did you hear about the vicar? I said, what vicar? He said, Mr. Phillips, Reverend Phillips. I said, yeah, I was with him last night. I go to church. And he said, oh, he died today. I said, no. He said, no, he died today. And I said, I've got to go. And I raced to the church, right to the other end of the council estate. And sure enough, at the age of 33, he died. And that was my first encounter with grief, really. And it shocked me. I didn't know what it was all about, but it did have a profound effect on me. To be honest, George, I kept dreaming and thinking, what would happen if I died? Where would I go? What would happen? I was frightened of dying at such a young age, and so many young people are actually, even today. And he'd got an infection. He was a boys' brigade leader as well, and he went on a camp, and he got an infection when an insect bit him. And he hadn't got a spleen. He'd had his spleen taken out through an accident, and he had no immune system. And he got the infection, and the infection killed him. And leaving him with a wife and 3 young children. But it had a profound effect upon me. What would happen to me? Well, the new vicar came. There was no way he could fill the shoes of Roy Phillips. I mean, I went to Roy's funeral, got time off school. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people were there, lining the streets. And, well, the new vicar came who was never going to fill the shoes. So I pulled away from church. About a year later, I had a cousin who I used to see when I was going to school, and he was going to college. And he said to me one day, why don't you come to church again? We need a goalkeeper for the football team. And I thought, okay, that's fine. And that's when I got in with some of the old crowd that I used to know, some of the rough lads. And they were different. And I asked them what the difference was. And they said they'd asked Jesus into their lives. And I remember going home on the bus, and I'm saying, Lord, I don't even know if I believe in you, but if you're there, come into my life, because I want what they've got. Do you know, I can honestly say, it sounds very cliche-ish. Something happened on that bus when I invited Jesus into my life. I got on the bus one person, and I kid you not, I got off the bus another person. And I went home, and I said to my mum, she was ironing, and with the curlers in. And I said, Mum, I think I've become a Christian. She said, we all go through phases like that, lad. You'll grow out of that in 2 weeks. Don't worry. We all go through phases like that. But something happened in my life. Straight away, I knew I needed to change my language. I used to swear like a trooper just to try and get accepted by my friends. I had a desire to go to church. My life changed dramatically. And you say, well, surely that can't happen to somebody who's 14. But it did. And I knew Jesus had entered in. Something had happened on that bus. And that's what happens. If you're sincere, God will come into your life.
And just going back there a slight little bit, you said there that your friend died and it was a shock. How did you deal with that grief for the first time?
It's a great question. I don't think I did, to be honest. I remember going to bed crying. I was distraught. Now, bearing in mind, this was the vicar. It wasn't like he was mega close to me, but I was totally and utterly distraught. And I saw his wife leave the forgive me, my phone's going in the background. I saw his wife going through grief and his 3 children, and I just couldn't put it together at all. And I've got to say, my family didn't really know how to handle it either. And I don't think they knew it would affect me as much as it did. And but it, for a whole year or more, until my cousin asked me to go back to play football, it just played on me big time.
You must have been only about 13 at the time, were you? Only about 13?
Yeah, I'd have been 14, yeah. 14 years of age. And you'd think that wouldn't bother you. But it does, you know. And I'll tell you a story a bit later on about my own grandson, who's 17, who is going through a real battle at the moment. I'll tell you about that later when I get into it. But he's certainly concerned about his mortality.
So do you think that was the catalyst for you seeking Jesus?
Without any shadow of a doubt, George, without any shadow of a doubt. You know, there's a verse in the Bible that says, the devil meant it for evil, but God meant it for good. And there's no question God used that to draw me to himself. There's no question about that at all. And I never look back. That 2 weeks that my mum gave me, it's the longest fortnight of my life. It's not worn off, it's worn on, to be honest. I love Jesus more today than I did then. That's for sure.
Okay, so you're 14. You found Jesus in your life. You had very little teaching or knowledge of Jesus. Did you want to change the world? So where did you go from here?
So I went to the church the next day, Saturday evening, when I gave my life to the Lord on the bus. And I went to church the next day. They accepted me, which was wonderful. Here was this lad who was a below average guy, who had a speech stammer, who wasn't educated at all. And they just accepted me for who I was. And I saw that their lives were different. And I went to, I was off school that week, and I went to the vicar. And I said, have you got any jobs? The new vicar. I said, have you got any jobs? He said, you can cut my lawn. So I cut his lawn, I cut his rhododendrons, I cut everything else down, his roses and everything else. And he started to speak to me. And that very week, I knew God wanted me to serve him. I thought I might end up being a church worker or a youth worker or something. I didn't know. And I could not wait to apply to go to Bible college. And well, interestingly enough, I applied to several Bible colleges, and I got one response saying, we can't take you. And the reason is we're an all women's college. We're an all ladies college. I thought that'll do for me.
Okay, you're 14 years of age. You came to know Jesus. Did you go looking for a Bible or what? Or, you know, some teaching or
yeah, well, when I got there, it's very interesting. When I got there, there was a young man there by the name of Alan Steele. And he took me under his wing, and he got me a Bible, and he would do Bible study with me, and he'd take me to Christian meetings or invite me to his home with his family. And he just really took me on. And it's so important that we take young people on and teach them. And he became a mentor. Still have great respect for him. I hadn't seen him for 30 or 40 years. And then we met a couple of months ago, and it was wonderful, absolutely wonderful. But the impact he had on my life was phenomenal. And he paid for me to go on a holiday, a youth holiday, where I could learn more about the Lord, and just amazing, really, that type of ministry. And that's how I really grew, to be honest. Okay,
your mum shrugged her shoulders and gave you 2 weeks. What impact after that did that have on your family? When you were still
they knew I was different. And in fairness, they said, if that's what he wants to do, it's up to him. It's fine. And I said to him, one day I'll go to Bible college, and I'm going to be a Christian worker. And they said, yeah, whatever. Yeah. They weren't bothered. Just don't get under our feet, and don't make sure you don't cost us any money.